losing my virginity, but it's also a story about me coming from a super impoverished area in Cleveland, about going to Dartmouth, about sexual abuse. So the romance part of it is really just a way to open up into an insight into deeper levels of my life.
Yeah. And I mean, I got to experience the show front row. What was it, last Friday? I believe you performed?
Last Saturday, yeah.
Last Saturday. And I was like sitting there the whole time. I don't know if you noticed me in the front row, just like at awe. Like the whole time. Everybody's laughing and everything, and I'm just like in tune with every word that you were saying. I was so amazed. And I'm so glad we could get you on the show today. But it was more so the psychology of everything that you kind of talked about at the end of the show that really just like brought it home for me. And it seems like it's a form of your therapy almost, the way you put that show together, like things that you had to release from your inner self to kind of like tell your story, but plant seeds into other people to let them come to their own reality.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
I mean, to be able to do that kind of show, to talk about your own sexual abuse, to talk about all the different things that happen to you, you have to do a lot of healing work. So when you see that show, what you're seeing is actually 10 years of healing work that I did. So when I was in New York, I underwent this kind of, I'll call it was my enlightenment. It was my spiritual awakening. When I was in New York, I was very miserable. I was, working a job I didn't want to work. I felt like I was out of alignment with my calling. I wasn't doing anything creative. So I started doing all these spiritual activities. That's why I started practicing yoga and meditation and tantra and shamanism. And so in the process of practicing all that, it led me down this path that eventually reoriented me to the right, to where I'm supposed to be. And so that allowed me to be able to write this kind of show.
Wow. And as you were working and everything, because you were, it sounded like you had a pretty successful career path planned out initially. What kind of just stops you, like, right in your path and said, no, this is not it. You need to be doing something else? What kind of, you said the awakening process, but what really just grabbed your attention and kind of put you on this highway of success that you've been on?
Well, I was just suicidally depressed, and I think when you get to those dark nights of the soul, as they call them, you either have to change or you keep doing things to kind of repress it. So before we came into this interview, we were talking about some of those things that you do. So for me, I was just, watching TV all the time and eating and doing all these things, and I knew I was suppressing it. Mm-hmm. And so I reached the point where I really wanted to get out of that. And so that in and of itself becomes a motivating factor if you let it and if you really pay attention to it. So I just paid attention and started doing the things that the other voice was telling me to do rather than the things that the destructive voice was telling me to do.
So I sadly didn't get the benefit of seeing the play, and hopefully I will be able to.
Hopefully you're going to go see this play.
Because it sounds fantastic.
It's amazing.
Right. I'm
not going to downplay anything right now.
The clips, and I'm like, oh my God.
I didn't know.
Because it's a topic that resonates with me. But so does your play actually kind of take us through your journey, through the realization you had about finding your path, or just kind of roughly tell me about the play without spoiling anything?
Yeah, no, actually the play takes you through the night that I'm about to lose my virginity. So you see me nervous, you see me anticipating this person that I had met on Craigslist coming over. And throughout the night of anticipation, I start recalling certain facts or aspects of my life. So I recall some of the things that happened to me at Dartmouth. The biggest thing that I recall, of course, though, is the molestation that happened to me when I was younger. So really, it's just me kind of anticipating and waiting for this person to come over while also remembering all these kind of traumatic things that happened to me and making assessments and analysis of that. So that's why it feels so, I guess, cathartic or moving for people, is because you go on this roller coaster of emotion. I mean, you laugh, you cry, you dance to Beyonce. So
you can't spoil it all for them. You can't give them all the goodies.
Right, I know, absolutely.
Yeah.
But how did you? I know, because at the end you kind of talk about it. If people are asking the questions at the end. But I want you to kind of go through the process of when you were listening to the voice and it was telling you, hey, we need to make some change, and how you went into this creative process to kind of release a lot of this. Like,
yeah,
you know, that's the most, because, you know, musicians, if a musician is doing it, they put it in their music, but you've done it in such a creative art form and put it into a show. It's just like,
yeah,
like I said, left me at awe watching it.
Yeah, you know, it's really one of those things where I just felt called from the beyond to write this show. And I don't have a background in theater. I had never done any acting or been on stage in any capacity, any real way. But I just felt like there was a voice that was like, you know, why don't you write a one-woman show about dating? And that was the voice that called me to this. And so I just started taking a class at the Marsh, which is this the theater out here that does only one-person shows. And actually, in the process of writing the show, of talking about my dating experiences and all this stuff, all the other trauma started to emerge. So I realized I needed to tell a very different story. And often that's how art is you think you're going to do one thing, but really there's something else that needs to come through you that serves a greater purpose than you. So as the artist, actually your job is to just move out of the way and let this thing or this message or whatever it is bubble up and come out. Yeah. And so that's all I did was I obeyed the call.
Exactly.
You know, and it didn't make sense at the time because, again, I didn't have a background in theater. But that's what you kind of have to do when you're doing artistic stuff or you feel like you just need to do this thing. It's not a logical process. It's not logic-based. It's just you leap into the unknown. You leap into leaps of faith, and then the whole thing unfolds in a way that serves people in a much bigger way than you anticipated. I didn't anticipate all of this.
So as you were going through this process, was it times where you had self-doubt, like, I can't get on this stage and do this, and this is
the whole way?
Okay, that's what I'm saying. Like, it was like, because you would think the way that you own the stage, because when you get up there, you own the audience. Like,
yes.
you grab everybody's attention. You would think you've been doing this for years and years and years as a kid, right? But tell us a little bit about the process of listening to that voice, but now facing something that you've never even attempted to do. Like, how was that process?
Yeah, I mean, the whole process was hard. The whole time I had self-doubt. The whole time I was like, I can't do this. The whole time I didn't believe in myself. And what's amazing to me about my journey is I've done all these things. I've graduated from an Ivy League school. I went to Columbia School of Journalism. I basically excelled at anything I've ever tried. I've excelled at it. And the whole time I've had this background noise of feeling not good enough, of a lack of worth, of a self-doubt. That background noise never went away until I did this work that I did in Paris, which we'll probably talk about. And so really, you have to find a way to overcome what you think are your perceived limitations. And that process, that's really the journey of an artist. That's the journey of anybody who succeeds, is you overcoming yourself. In the process of writing this, there was a lot of haters, okay?
Oh, I bet.
There was a lot of haters in the workshop that I was in that tried to come for me, that tried to come for my energy, come for your light. It really is true that once you start shining a little bit brighter, you all of a sudden get these targets from places you never anticipated. But your job is to stay focused on what was motivating you from the beginning, is to stay in alignment with whatever you are being told to do. And if you stay connected to that, then the rest of it just becomes outside noise on the periphery and you get the work done. So there were nights when I would leave that class. I was taking a night class with David Ford at the Marsh in tears because I had given so much of myself. I was vulnerable, and then people were critical. I would leave, I would collapse that night, and then I get right back up. So that's what I do, is I collapse and then I get right back up. So you just have to keep getting up no matter what.
And how long was that process for you to, like, get up and then finally say, okay, now I'm feeling it. Now I know that I've arrived, kind of feeling? You know?
I don't know that I have arrived.
Well, I mean,
I don't know that I'm there. You know what I mean?
No.
I think we're here to tell you that you arrived.
She's definitely arrived. I'll be the first to tell you if nobody else has told you. But
I said we're here to tell you that you arrived. No, I don't know if you definitely know. You're on the what? On one of those
trajectory.
Jets.
Yeah, she's
Jets.
flying.
You
She's flying
are
through the
just
universe right now. But more so, like, okay, so those nights that you cried and you were worried and you're like, what am I doing? And now saying, okay, I'm gonna go. Not only is it only here in the Bay Area that you've done the show, or is it throughout the United States?
I've done it in a lot of places. I've done it in Chicago, Cleveland. I'm going to go do it at Dartmouth on October 14th. So I've done it a couple places, popcorned it around.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's a couple of things I want to ask you. For one, were you expecting that this work that you created out of a workshop to take on this energy, this success that it has experienced?
Okay, so I knew that it was going to resonate. I think it's the same kind of energy you feel with what you're trying to do in terms of your show and your work around. You're so excited and passionate about it because I think you are connected to a deeper resonance. You can feel the call for it. So in the same way, I felt the call for the work. And it's something that you don't know, because I think all artists feel the call for the work, but you don't know how it's going to connect. You don't know how people are going to receive it. But because I've always had such a big ego, even with this background noise of self-doubt, I just felt like I need to get this on a bigger stage. And so I delivered that. And then how the audience responded to it was out of my control. But I knew as soon as I walked on the stage and I delivered that first performance and there was a standing ovation and it was like the very beginning of the show, I knew that this was connecting to people in a way that I hadn't anticipated. Right. And then it's been a hit from the beginning. And again, just because...
Wow, from the gate.
From the gate, it was a hit, yeah. Because it, again, is if you give people something that moves them or makes them feel like they've been transformed, they will do the work of selling the product for you. So they went out and told friends. This has mostly been word of mouth. People bringing people in. You got to see this show, da-da-da-da. And so that is where a lot of my success came from, is that people lift you up if they feel like it's something that gives them worth and gives them value.
So my second question actually has to deal with some of the content of your show, because it's close to home. It's not easy talking about being molested.
Of course, yeah.
How were you able to find the courage, I guess, to share that story?
Yeah, it's because I did 10 years of work. So when I was talking about all the spiritual activities I did, once you work through the shame and you work through the humiliation and you work through all these heavy, problematic emotions that you were carrying, that you think something is wrong with you, once you work through all of that, then you're not shy anymore. Then it's not something's wrong with me, it's something bad happened to me and now I can talk about this and I can share it. You only feel like you can't talk about it if you haven't done the work to transcend it. Because I have done the work to transcend it, this doesn't feel like it's a mark on my soul anymore, or this is something that I'm carrying.
You've
like
let it go.
I've let it go. And so now, because I've let it go and I can talk about it publicly, other people, so many women come up to me after the show to say, just this exact same thing happened to me. Thank you for sharing publicly. Because then it allows them to relook at their trauma and to work through their trauma in a different way. So once you do your work and you elevate yourself, you can help other people be elevated. But you can't help other people in a real way if you haven't worked through it. So the last thing I'll say about that is a lot of artists, they try to be, they try to have the depths and they try to do this intense work on stage when they themselves haven't done the work. You haven't done the work, you can't be an usher for other people. You can only be an usher if you've really done the work. And I have done the work.
She's put in the time, y'all.
I put in the time.
Yeah. So I know now, after the show, you're doing another program which is dealing with the mind. And that's the EMDR?
EMDR, yeah.
Okay.
So that was a type of therapy that I did in Paris, actually in depth. So after all this work that I have just been discussing, this 10 years of work that I've done, I still was carrying the weight, the trauma of my molestation, and I didn't know it. And I didn't remember any of the details or anything that happened to me. I just remembered bits and pieces. And so what started to happen was all of my depression was linked to this not remembering. It was buried in my subconscious. And so I was still suicidally depressed when I was doing the show. So I would go out there, I would do the show, and then afterwards I would go back and I was still in this kind of deep darkness. And so it was only after I did EMDR and I really got to the root of it and I remembered everything that happened to me and I worked through the trauma that I felt a real liberation from it in a way that I haven't felt before. So EMDR is a type of therapy where you actually rewire the brain. So talk therapy, you can take years to get to arrive at that point. EMDR is, it's really, I can't say enough about this. Somehow it uses the same process where when you sleep, your eyes move from side to side. That's the brain rewiring and reprocessing all the things that have happened during the day, moving it to different parts of the brain. Trauma is frozen in the emotional center of the brain. So in order to transcend that trauma, you have to release it from where it's frozen, and then it reprocesses it to different parts of the brain. EMDR is the process to allow you to do that. And that's why it's been so successful with war veterans, super traumatized people like me, is because it actually it moves the trauma.
Okay. For the sake of our listeners and even myself, please explain what EMDR is.
Okay, so it's... Okay, and I have to apologize.
So E is for what? E stands for what? M stands for what?
Yeah, okay, so I wish you actually have to look this up because I actually don't know.
I'm going
I know it's eye desensitization something.
Okay.
But it's basically you just sit with this person who's a certified EMDR specialist, and she just leads you through these eye movements, and then you just start to go into the trauma. It really is so simple. I feel like I'm not doing justice to the work, but it really is really simple. You stimulate both hemispheres of the brain, and in the stimulating of both hemispheres of the brain as you work through the trauma, it somehow reprocesses the trauma to higher levels of the brain, so it's not frozen in your emotional center. That's the basis of it, is it releases the trauma. And if you don't release the trauma, it continues to cause depression. It continues to cause all these different problems that, a lot of people experience from being traumatized.
And we talked about this a little bit off the air. So many people in our community, we go through a lot of trauma.
Yeah.
Just being, of a minority state in the United States.
Yeah.
And it's so crazy that we don't talk about this enough in our community.
Yeah.
We always try to sweep things under the rug.
Yeah.
Like you said, it's deep within us, and we've never identified with it, and it brings up so many other things that we have to get to the deeper root of.
Yeah. Look, Black people are so traumatized.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Racism is traumatizing.
Yeah.
And it's amazing to me that we don't have places to work through all of the different things that happen to us as a result of just being people of color in this country that are constantly targeted. And so, I think part of our burden as people of color, as Black people in America, is that we carry all of this stuff with us, and we carry it in this way where you almost get a badge of honor, especially, I know, Black women, for being so strong. You know what I mean? But there's a price to resilience, and I mentioned this at the end of my show when you saw it, is that there's a cost to constantly being resilient. And that cost is often our mental health. So we often look put together on the outside. We look like we got it all together. We got a career. And then inside, you just dying. Yeah. You know what I mean? You just sinking.
I would also say physical health, too.
Physical health. Yeah. I have lupus.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think this is...
and I have things based on stress, too.
Yes. Stress is one of the biggest, it will take you down.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a way that we need to refocus on mental health and refocus on eating some of the stuff that you were talking about, because a lot of our potential, our creative potential, is trapped because we are trapped in our minds, or we're trapped in our bodies. And for the few of us that manage to make it, Oprah, or the few of us that manage to transcend and use their potential, that's great, but there's so many more people that are deeply creative as Black people, especially, so brilliant, but it's trapped because we're not really free internally.
Yeah, and since you brought up, being Black in America, which is huge, now with social media, and especially all the things that are going on across the nation, where it doesn't seem like we're getting any kind of justice anytime something happens. Think about the kids that are growing up with instant access to all that too. So all the trauma that's going on there. I think as parents, we need to address these things with our kids and our youth, just in general, because that could make you feel like, okay, where's the justice for my people? Where's the justice when I go in the streets? Who do I reach out to when I feel like something's going to happen? Because if I call the police, every time I look up, are doing something to my culture. You know what I'm saying? So that's a huge traumatizing factor as well.
They're victimizing you instead of protecting you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, especially how it's in social media now. You know, social media, every time you go through something, you're going to see, just like yesterday, I was going through my Facebook, and it was like an 80-year-old black woman. And I don't know the exact city it was. She was in a parking lot, but next thing you know, you see a police officer slamming her to the ground. And then by slamming her to the ground, she started bleeding from the head, and it was this huge group around her. But yet and still, think about how many kids are seeing that. That could be, you know, looking at that as their grandmother getting slammed to the ground, not getting any kind of justice. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? So
I think especially what social media does in making, like when the police shootings happen, making it so visible, is that it perpetuates the